It is July. We are nearing the actual things that we require for the season. Big Ten Media Days is this month. We don't know if training camp kicks off this month. I would bet that it does with August 31st coming up. So with that in mind, we're going to dig a little bit deeper when it comes to Michigan. We're bringing on Max Chadwick from PFF to break down not only Michigan, but I'm asking about some of Michigan's bigger opponents in 2024. We're going to discuss all that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And you can see as well that we are joined by Max Chadwick from PFF. 2 in a summer. We're really doing it. Hitting this offseason hard. Thanks for joining us, Max.
No, thanks for having me again, Isaiah. I really appreciate having me on.
Well, let's get into, obviously, like, nothing's really been settled since we've talked last, right? It's all just been kind of conjecture as to what we think, whether it's Michigan or, you know, the rest of the teams out there. I mean, yes, you've seen some portal additions and things like that. We'll get into some of Michigan's portal additions, who I believe all came after the fact, after we spoke to you last time. But what I want to kind of get into, because I know that Michigan's kind of, it's not nearly as high as it was for you last year. I know JJ McCarthy, Blake Corum are guys that made a big difference. And I know you're really high on Ohio State right now. But Michigan does have a lot of players that are at or near the top of your lists when it comes to the top returning players. What do you see out of some of, like, who are some of those guys? I know people can go read it and all that, but who are some of those guys that you think, Mason Graham, I believe you have as the top defensive interior player. Will Johnson, I know, is up there as far as cornerback. And how much of an impact do you think that those guys can make to potentially carry Michigan to go the distance?
Yeah, I think that the defense is still national championship caliber. You mentioned those two right there. I think they're the best at their positions, a cornerback and for Will Johnson and D tackle for Mason Graham. And honestly, we can argue they're 2 top 5 players in the country. And we're going to actually do a top 50 players in college football list coming out later in the summer. And I can probably guarantee that those two will probably be in the top 5. So they're really excellent, and they're going to be leading that defense. And also you got guys like Kenneth Grant, who's one of the best D tackles in the country. Jayshon Barham, a Maryland transfer at linebacker. I think he's one of the 5 best linebackers that we have in college football. Obviously, we'll see with Rod Moore, his torn ACL recovery, but I consider him one of the best safeties in college football too. So Makari Page, really good player as well. So Michigan defensively is still loaded. And Josiah Stewart, I think, is a top 10 edge defender in the country too. The issue is offensively, and they do have stars on that end, like Colston Loveland, who I think is the best tight end in the nation. And Donovan Edwards is a really good running back, but there's a lot more questions offensively. But this defense is still national championship caliber, and that's probably going to be the driving force for this team next season.
Kind of given the uncertainty, how hard is it for you to kind of evaluate Michigan's offense? Because you do look at it and you see an offensive line. A lot of those guys have played games, right? And like, Josh Prebe obviously was at Northwestern. You've seen guys like Giovanni El-Hadi, who started a couple games when Trevor Keegan's been injured throughout the years. Jeff Percy, if he ends up being on the line, started a game at Rutgers. So, like, that's hard to evaluate on one end, but the quarterback feels like it's even harder to evaluate in the offseason, because Alex Orji, while he's taken a lot of snaps, we haven't seen him throw a pass in an actual game, only the spring game. Jack Tuttle's only kind of come in when the games are fully in hand. So how hard is it for you to kind of evaluate what the quarterback position is?
Yeah, it's super hard. I think Alex Orji is the one that we're kind of going with as our projected starter right now. And like you said, he's never thrown a pass, right? And if you want to see him as a passer, the only thing you could do is watch the spring game. Now, he did look pretty sharp in the spring game. I think his arm talent is clear. He's got a really, really good arm. The issue is accuracy sometimes. You saw it a couple times, spring up in that spring game. But I think as a runner, he's a really dynamic runner. We saw him at multiple times last season as a Wildcat quarterback from Michigan. So that'd be a great element to the run game along with Donovan Edwards. But as a passer, he's a complete unknown right now. So I think that's definitely one of the biggest question marks for Michigan right now is just, okay, what is offense going to look like? Because you lose your first round quarterback, you lose one of the greatest running backs you've ever had in Blake Corum. you lose your top 6 offensive linemen, and you lose your top 2 wide receivers as well. So it's a lot of questions offensively for this program right now, and I think namely it starts under center with Alex Orji.
I'm intrigued kind of by the fact that I think that we could say similar things. It's almost like uncanny how much we can extrapolate. And there are different players, different systems, different teams, all that. But everything that's kind of said about Alex Orji was kind of the same stuff that was being said about Jalen Milroe a couple of years ago, I feel. And then I think it helps that, he was the scout team quarterback playing as Jalen Milroe and all of that. Based off of what limited information you have, can he be that type of guy? Can he actually be, even beginning of last year, people were not necessarily talking about Jalen Milroe that favorably, but by the end of the year, everyone was. Do you think that Alex Orji could get there?
I think he has the talent, the physical talent to do it. And I think that's definitely a high bar to reach, because I consider Jalen Milroe as one of the top 5 quarterbacks that we have in America right now. But physically, I think he's got that talent, right? He's got the speed, he's got the size. He's a massive kid at 6'3", 236 pounds. So he's a really, really good runner. He could run over guys. He could run over linebackers, honestly. And then the arm strength is a huge plus too. So he's got the arm talent. It's just the accuracy. And we've seen that plague Jalen Milroe at times last year as well, with his accuracy, just kind of spraying the ball over the field. That was an issue last year. But I think Michigan would be smart to kind of use him in a Jalen Milroe role, where Alabama, they figured out, okay, with this offense, let's have Milroe run around, make some plays with his legs, and then also not take too many passes short and intermediate. Let's uncork it. Let's let him throw the deep ball. And Milroe was one of the best deep ball throwers last year. In fact, I think he had the second best deep passing grade behind only Jaden Daniels. I think Michigan would be pretty smart to let Alex Orji do that and throw a lot of deep balls next year as well. Of course, you got to have the receivers to do that. And Colston Loveland might not be utilized that much, which I think would be a mistake. But I do think utilizing the deep ball with Alex Orji is probably the best way to go going forward, because I think the accuracy short and intermediate will be a little bit up and down to start the season at least.
Well, and if they are going to target some guys downfield, it's going to include some of the transfers. I know Michigan, as far as receivers, they're touting up Tyler Morris and Samaj Morgan, Fred Moore, but I feel like with all 3 of those, we're going to just have to see it in game. It's kind of hard to extrapolate much there, but obviously Michigan's got a lot of transfers in. They brought Amarian Walker back. He's over back at wide receiver. That doesn't necessarily tell you anything. They've got CJ Charleston from Youngstown State. I don't know how much you've watched him being at the lower level. And then obviously they've got a lot of transfers elsewhere as well, particularly in the secondary. So what can you tell me about what you've seen from some of those transfers that are coming over?
Yeah, I think the star one is got to be Jayshon Barham. I think that's the one everyone's kind of talking about right now, is, obviously replacing Michael Barrett, replacing Junior Colson. I think that he's the guy that I would expect to be the star for Michigan. I think Josh Pribby, you mentioned him before too. He's going to be a guy that I think will be a starting offensive lineman for Michigan this upcoming season. So I like him. And yeah, I think they did a pretty solid job in the portal overall, right? I think they brought in some key pieces to help, usher in the new age for Michigan. I like some of the guys that they brought in too. So yeah, I think Jaden Mangum is a guy that I liked from Michigan State that they got in the portal just recently, a couple months ago. So yeah, they did a solid job. I don't think there's anyone that really stands out as like, okay, that guy's like a star besides like a Jayshon Barham, for example. But I think there are other guys though that would definitely be contributors to this roster. But I think most of the guys that you're going to see from Michigan this upcoming season, most of them I would say are going to be the guys that we saw last year, just kind of step up into extended roles this upcoming season.
I'm curious too with that, because I feel like a lot of the sleeping on Michigan, and I get the concerns, right? I don't know what's going to happen. This could be a 8-4 team. It could be a 12-0 team. It's really hard to really kind of figure out what they are, is because some of the guys that they got, a CJ Charleston or an Amir Hall, being at the lower level, there's not as much stats. There's not as much tape. There's not as much all of that. Whereas you look around the country, you look at Ohio State, they brought in high premier guys that, everybody knows, Caleb Downs and Quinshon Judkins, for better or worse, the only offensive lineman that played for another team that Michigan went up against that they can name by name because he struggled so much, and Seth McLaughlin. But you think that just by virtue of just kind of keeping the team somewhat intact, and just kind of supplementing it rather than going out and kind of getting these big star names. Do you think that that's kind of hurt the perception of Michigan this offseason?
Yeah, definitely. I think, Ohio State adding superstars in the portal definitely helps their, standing in terms of national media, in terms of other people, how they view the roster. Because, yeah, guys like you mentioned, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, like those are two superstars. Michigan didn't really add superstars. Besides, like, again, Barham's a really, really good player, but I don't know if he really constitutes as a superstar right now. But they did add, they just have really good depth. And that's something that was one of the biggest reasons why they won it all last year, is that they had great depth. And now that depth has to become the starters, right? When you have 13 guys get drafted in the NFL, you need guys behind them to step up and take over. So that's, I think, something that Michigan's done a really good job of in recent years. And now is, they got to do it this year, and even more so than they've ever had to before. But I think that they're in a good spot. I still think it's a top 10 team in the country. Like I said, I still think this defense is one of the best defenses that we have in America, no matter what EA Sports College Football 25 will tell you. I do think this is the top at least 2 or 3 defense in the country. So I think that's going to be elite. It's just I have a lot of concerns offensively with this program right now, and a lot of questions, at least I should say, offensively. But Sherrone Moore has shown to have done a great job in the past, so I think he'll do as good of a job as he can with the offense right now. I just think right now there's a lot of questions for me to put them up there as once again a national title contender.
All right, we're gonna continue on. I want to ask you about some of those teams that Michigan's gonna face throughout the season. So we will get to that here in just a moment. But before we do, I love sports. Max loves sports. We all love sports. We love them so much. They should never, ever, ever stop. But as playoffs have winded down in coming out of the spring, we get fewer games and sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel lets the sports keep going whenever we want. And all I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I am in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every single day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Max. So I'm losing my voice for some reason, so I'm glad that you're going to be carrying the load here. But I think one of the biggest questions when it comes to Michigan this year has little to do with Michigan, and it's more that there's an increase in schedule. So I want to walk through your impressions of the 5 biggest teams that they're going to be facing. Week 2, things get started in a hurry, right? So Michigan has no time to kind of really figure out what it is. It has to figure it out fast if it wants to win, because Texas comes to town for the first time, second ever meeting between the two programs. Obviously, I know there's a lot of optimism with Quinn Ewers returning for his, I believe, redshirt junior year, his senior year, whatever you want to call it. But what else does Texas have? I know they've lost quite a bit. They've lost the receivers. They lost Adonai Mitchell. They lost that big defensive interior tackle. So what do they still have, and kind of what is your outlook on Texas?
Yeah, so they lost all their weapons from last year, but I think they did a really good job in the portal of addressing that and adding in really good weapons. So, like I said, they lost their top rusher last year in Jonathan Brooks. They lost their top 5 receivers from last year as well, but they added some really, really good talent in the portal. Adding guys like a tight end like Amari Niblack, who I think is going to be a breakout star at tight end. Isaiah Bond might be a first-round receiver coming in from Alabama. Silas Bolden coming in from Oregon State. Matthew Golden coming in from Houston. Like, they really addressed the receiver. So I actually still think Texas has like a top 5 to 10 receiving core in college football right now, even with all the losses they had. And I think their offensive line is a top 5 offensive line in college football as well. Guys like Kelvin Banks Jr., their left tackle, is probably going to be a top 10 pick in next year's draft as well. So I think the supporting cast for Quinn Ewers and obviously Steve Sarkisian calling plays is still really good. This offense is still going to be elite. And obviously with Ewers leading the way too, they're in a really good spot. The questions are defensively, and some of the losses that you said before. They kind of played okay in coverage last year, and against some better teams, they really struggled. So I don't know if Michigan has the guys on offense yet to really challenge them in terms of passing the ball down the field, but we'll see. And then they obviously, you mentioned, they lost Devondre Sweat, they lost Byron Murphy. They were the 2 best D tackles in the country, you could argue, last year. They do have some guys in the defensive line that I like Alfred Collins, who's going to step into a bigger role this year. Trey Moore transferring in from UTSA, but that pass defense for Texas is still a little bit of a question mark right now. But this is still a top 5 team in the country, in my opinion, and I think they still have an elite offense and just some questions to answer defensively, in my opinion.
2 weeks later, USC comes to town to open up Big Ten play. Those are words that no one would have expected 2 years ago. But obviously, they've lost quite a bit themselves. And although they seem like they're trying defensively, bringing in D'Anton Lynn, but what are your perceptions of USC at the moment?
Yeah, I think they're still going to be really talented team. I think they're still like a top 20 team that I would say in the country right now. They got high upside on offense with a guy like Miller Moss who looked really, really good in their bowl game against Louisville. Obviously, Lincoln Riley's quarterbacks always do well, right? And it'd be foolish for anyone to be like, oh, this one's not going to be good, because you have like 3 Heisman Trophy winners in Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Caleb Williams. You got Jalen Hurts, who's a Heisman runner-up, 3 #1 overall picks as well. The worst one was Spencer Rattler, who's still an NFL quarterback right now, right? So that's still like, okay, let's kind of raise our expectations a little bit. Now, I'm not going to say Miller Moss is going to be a #1 overall pick or future NFL starter like most of Lincoln Riley's quarterbacks, but I do think he'll be solid. And then they also have some really, really fun players offensively that I'm really excited to see break out a little bit more, like Zachariah Branch, the receiver, Deuce Robinson, another big receiver they have, Woody Marks transferring in from Mississippi State. The question is, and you mentioned before, is how quickly is this defense going to improve, right? D'Anton Lynn was an excellent hire at defensive coordinator. He was fantastic at UCLA in only 1 year at UCLA. In 2022, actually, UCLA had the 111th best defense in the country in terms of EPA per play. In their first year under D'Anton Lynn, the very next year, they were 8th in the country. So I think that Lincoln Riley's hoping that he's going to turn around this defense quickly, like he did at UCLA. But and they added some good players in the transfer portal on defense too. But the question is okay, how quickly can this defense improve, and how are you going to look in the post Caleb Williams era right now? But I still think USC would be good enough that in their first year in the Big Ten, they're going to be like a top 20-ish team in college football, probably.
Washington basically is an expansion team at this point, not only a new coach, but like 30 something new players. A lot of these guys that we knew from the national championship game last year are gone. What do they have? Obviously, Michigan fans love Jed Fish. They won't love him for that first road game, but generally they love Jed Fish due to his 2 years in Ann Arbor, and have always wished him well. But what did they bring to the table as far as what you know at this point?
It's impossible to project this team right now. I think they're gonna, you kind of look at it. I think this is a little harsh because I don't think it'll be this bad. But you look at, TCU making a run to the national title game and then going 5-7 the very next year because of all the losses they suffered. That's kind of what was going to happen to Washington, right? I think they go from a national title contending team and playing against Michigan to now a team I think will be more like a 7-5 team, and that's like best case scenario. I think like a 7-5 is where I'm expecting them. I mean, we have a stat actually that there are 32 players on offense and defense that played at least 300 snaps last year. They only returned 8 of those 32 players, and none of them come off on the offense. So the offense is completely brand new. I think their defense has some good players in the second and third level at linebacker and the secondary. But that offense, man, it's a complete unknown right now. Now, I like Jed Fish. He did a great job turning around Arizona. And I think he'll do a good job at Washington. I just don't think it'll be immediate at Washington. And it could be a rough couple of years before, he finally gets all of his guys in there for Washington to turn around. So I think it'll be a little bit of a hangover for the Huskies next year.
Now, I know everyone's fawning over Ohio State. We'll get to them very briefly because I'll have a more pointed question with Ohio State because we talk about them a lot. But to me, Oregon is maybe a little bit scarier, but also made a little bit less scary just by virtue that they come all the way to the Big House in November. So what makes Oregon so kind of daunting at this moment?
Yeah, I think Oregon, everyone keeps saying, who's the best team in the country, Ohio State or Georgia? I think you got to throw Oregon in that mix as well. I think they're in that top tier with those teams. And I think they're just so, well-rounded on both sides of the ball. I do think Oregon has the best offense in college football. Getting a guy like Dylan Gabriel, who's actually my Heisman pick right now, was huge for replacing, Bo Nix. They have the best receiving core in college football, in my opinion, as well. They have a top 5 offensive line in college football, and they have a top 10 running back unit in college football. So they are elite everywhere on offense. And then defensively, they have a really good defensive line, especially in terms of run defending, which could be an issue for Michigan, if they're not be able to pass the ball. I do think Oregon's pass rush is a little bit of a question mark, but as a run defense team, they should be really strong. I really like their secondary as well. They had some really good players like Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, in their secondary. I think Oregon's a top 10 secondary in college football too. So the defense, and Dan Lanning is their head coach. He's a defensive minded head coach. He's a really, a brilliant defensive mind too. So I think Oregon is pretty clearly to me a top 3 team in the country. And I think they're going to be competing with Ohio State very much so for the Big Ten title next year.
So with Ohio State, I have been kind of hammering a couple different things. I'll just kind of share them here, and you can kind of give your thoughts. And I know you're a big proponent of Will Howard, whereas I'm not.
I'm not really.
Okay.
That's the one question for me. I'm kind of like okay with him,
Okay, so I misread. It must have been another PFF analyst that it was really high on Will Howard. So my question is, why are people high on Will Howard, even though you aren't necessarily? And where do you see kind of his pitfalls? And my second one is, and I know you're doing more grading and analysis, but with what Chip Kelly is typically brought to the table, like, can that help or can that hinder them? So to me, when I look at their roster in a lot of ways, it's too many cooks in the kitchen at skill positions. And I don't feel like they fixed their glaring issues on the offensive line and defensive line. Am I onto something there or not?
I have no questions with the defensive line at all. I actually ranked them number 1, I believe. And I think Michigan's right there too. I think it's 1A, 1B. So the defensive line, I have 0 questions about. The offensive line, I know some people have mentioned that before. I actually think it's a top 10 O-line in the country. They brought back 4 of their starters last year, and they brought in Seth McLaughlin, which I know Michigan fans are going to say, he was terrible in that Rose Bowl. He did have a rough year last year, but the year before, he actually was one of the best SEC centers that we had. He just kind of had a down year. So I still think it would be a good center for them. So I think the O-line is actually pretty good. The only question I have with Ohio State is, we mentioned it was Will Howard, and I think he's kind of around as a passer. He's maybe even worse than Kyle McCord, a little bit worse, I would say. I think where he fits into this offense maybe a little bit better than McCord's, that McCord's really a statue in the pocket. And he has no mobility at all. Will Howard's actually a pretty good runner, and I think that'll be a really, really good element for this offense and a Chip Kelly offense who really designs a run game well. And having guys like Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, they have the best running back unit in the country. Having a quarterback like Will Howard who can also make some plays on the ground, that's going to stress a lot of defenses out, because they already have to worry about, 2 outstanding running backs. And now you got to worry about the quarterback taking off and running on you as well. He's really good off play action. The problem is when you take away play action, which is a standard drop back, he's really not that good. There's times where he struggles to see zone coverage sometimes. I think Will Howard's a solid passer. I don't think he's anything special. I don't really think he's that big of an upgrade over Kyle McCord either. So I think that's the biggest question mark. And really the only question mark for me with Ohio State is, can they win with a guy like Will Howard as their quarterback? Or are we in the age of college football now where you need like a special quarterback? Even with a great team around him, do you still need like a really, really good quarterback to win a national title? I think they still can win one with Will Howard under center, but I don't think he's this special quarterback like other schools have.
You heard it here. Max Chadwick just predicted Michigan repeat national championships. He did predict Michigan as the national champion last year, so don't get mad at him for saying nice things about the teams Michigan faces. Max, thank you so much for joining. This was absolutely a pleasure. We'll get you back on sometime at least as we get closer to the season, if not during the season.
No, I appreciate you, Isaiah. Thanks, man.
All right, some really good stuff from Max Chadwick from over at PFF there. So we don't have a heck of a lot of time left here. So I want to spend a little bit of it talking about recruiting. I did a little piece yesterday, 5 guys that we could, that you should not necessarily be on commit watch for, and already one of them is kind of fallen off. But I still question, now without having gotten any intel, there's still the ones that Wink Martindale and then quoted by Lou Esposito, buckle up essentially, or stay buckled. I don't think that we haven't gotten a new eyeball emoji from Sharon, so it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anyone committed, but I would say that out of the 5 guys I had listed, that it appears that Marco Jones is more so going to Texas A&M. I think baseball played a big factor in that. Michigan did not really make baseball a part of their pitch, which is a bit of a mistake in my eyes, because he is very serious about playing baseball at the next level. Supposedly he's a really good baseball prospect, and it's already going to be a hard sell, the baseball program. So it was kind of all football. So I do believe he fell out. But there are others, and I had ranked them as to who the next one is. The first one is probably not going to be the actual first because he's now deciding on July 13th. It got announced today. That's Philip Wright, and he's the wide receiver from Destrehan, Louisiana. 3-star receiver. I believe he's a 5-star on Rivals. 4-star on Rivals. Yeah. He's 3-star everywhere, but then one place he's a 5. No. 4-star, I believe, on Rivals. But nonetheless, he would be a guy that I think is going to end up in this class. I think Georgia was really strong for him, but it just looks like that is that they kind of filled up. LSU is the other finalist that he has. This just feels like it's most likely going to go Michigan's way, and everything. Then you've got Andrew Olesh, who supposedly, according to EJ Holland this morning, isn't necessarily looking like he's like it's between Michigan and Alabama. Now it's Michigan and Florida. For whatever reason, he just seems like he's trying to, talk himself out of Michigan one way or another. But I would, as EJ said, he still would keep his prediction in on Michigan. I'm going to do the same. He could come basically at any time as well. But he is still kind of trying to figure some things out there. The last guy I had on my list, partially because I can't remember the second guy without looking it up, which I will do in the meantime, is Andrew Babalola, the 5-star offensive lineman from Kansas. He's trending towards Michigan at this point. It looked like it was all Stanford. Michigan gave him a lot to think about. I think that it's one of those things where in the end, Michigan is going to be the choice. It in part, not necessarily due to intel, but in part because it's kind of like what Steve Wiltfong told me at the Army All-American game in 2016, in January 2016. He had a prediction in at that point for Lavert Hill to be a Michigan guy. And being around Lavert as much as I had been before that, right? Because he was a local guy, so I'd been around him quite a bit. I've been to multiple games, and then I was pretty close to him. Well, during the week, and it was like pretty clear he did not know where he was going and all of that. Michigan State was making a strong move towards him at that point. But as Steve Wiltfong told me in that time period, he said, Lavert might not know where he's going, but he's going to Michigan. It's like you can kind of tell like what the deciding factors are. That's kind of how I think it is with Andrew Babalola, between the offensive line excellence, the team success, the academics that Michigan has, and then just the bond with Sharon Moore, who is a fellow Kansas native. I think all those things will end up playing out, and he'll end up being a Wolverine. The other one, I had to look it up. Kamar Archie from Hun School, the linebacker. The big danger there for Michigan is more so that they kind of slow jammed the news there for a minute with him. And that allowed Clemson and Rutgers to get back into it. But I think him having a teammate, a high school teammate from the Hun School, Owen Wafel, on the Wolverines, I think that kind of helps embolden them. Now I think they're a little bit more full court press because it's just a little bit less obvious what some of their other linebacker targets are going to do. I do still, despite people starting to get Pollyanna-ish about things, I still feel extremely good about Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. I think that, him feeling Michigan was his best visit overall. That's going to play a big part, for instance. But I think with just it going to take a minute for him to decide. He's not deciding likely until either right before the season or on early signing day. They need to get some linebackers, and I think Kamar Archie will ultimately choose for the Wolverines once that's all said and done. So I still feel good about the 4. I mean, any of them could drop out. It's recruiting. Again, just because I feel good about it, heck, I could come to you and be like, all 5 are silent commits, and they could end up with 2 of them. That's just the nature of recruiting. I have to try to remind people of that all the time, I feel. Recruiting's a little bit different now. People understand it more because you got NIL involved. All that. I can't breathe. Sorry. So, with that in mind, since I can't finish my thought, we are at time anyway. That'll finish it. We're going to be back tomorrow, is at least the plan. You know how my plans work, but nonetheless, I saw that Zach Blackerby, who runs the college sites for us at Locked On, and he's the host of Locked On Auburn, he's doing 10 episodes a week. He's doing 2 full episodes a day. I don't know if we can get there, but I would love to. But we're going to do our best to do more. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon. Peace.